providing biodiversity literature and mobilizing data from it are also the aims of the BIOfid project. Gerwin Kasperek, curator of the biology collection at University Library Johann Senckenberg in Germany, will now present BIOfid efforts to foster data-driven biodiversity research in Central Europe.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to speak here in Paris at BHL Day 2023 and to show you how BIOfid contributes to data-driven biodiversity research. The BIOfid project is focused on Central European biodiversity and is conducted by 3 partners. Who are these 3 partners? The University Library Johann Senckenberg in Frankfurt in Germany has, due to its history, strong collections in natural history, which have been co-funded by the DFG, the German Research Foundation, for many, many decades. And the library is an affiliate of BHL since 2018. Second partner, Senckenberg, is one of Germany's leading institutions in biodiversity research. It has its headquarters in Frankfurt and runs several museums and research institutions across the country. And the Text Technology Lab has an excellent team for automated analysis and synthesis of structures and content of natural language texts. BIOfid started in 2017 and is currently in its second 3-year funding phase. A third 3-year funding phase was just approved at the end of last year. And this mode of funding, which might seem a little strange, with consecutive 3-year phases, results from the DFG funding program Specialized Information Services, in German Fachinformationsdienste für die Wissenschaft. And the maximum duration of projects in this funding scheme is 12 years, but hopefully this limit will be modified in the future. So, what are the main goals of BIOfid? According to the need of our target group, there are 3 central aims. Mobilizing data from the literature by text mining, making such data available for IT-based analysis. Then providing software for text mining, software tools, which can be reused by others. And third, to digitize biodiversity literature, especially from the 20th century, and in particular to alleviate the digital gap in the period 1920 to 2000. There are some further aims which will not be dealt with in today's presentation. BIOfid runs a hosting service for open access journals in biodiversity using OJS as a technical basis. BIOfid acquires licenses for electronic resources that can be used nationwide, for example, Cornell's database, Birds of the World. We establish a service for digitization on demand for biodiversity literature, and we also purchase printed literature and supply this literature nationwide, mainly via interlibrary loan. Now, mobilizing data, what could this mean? In its broadest sense, it means the transfer of information from natural language texts to formats which allow the information to be easily found, accessed, integrated, and reused. And of course, this wording refers to the principles of fair data that are becoming increasingly important. Let's take a real-world example. Here, a snippet from a historical flora of Frankfurt describing occurrences of an orchid species. We can imagine several bits of information which can be pulled from this natural language description and would be relevant for today's biodiversity research. I made up 2 examples here. An occurrence record representing the fact that this species once occurred at a certain location in Frankfurt, and a trait record representing information about the width of the leaves of this orchid. Of course, for now, this is only a mind game. It is not possible yet, but we are exploring methods to extract such information automatically, in particular regarding information about occurrence of taxa in specific locations and about taxa in specific habitats. Examples of the great need for mobilized data can be found in biogeography, but of course the need is not limited to biogeography. There's already a lot of data for comparing the past distribution of organisms with today's distributions, but these data are too incomplete, even for well-studied organism groups. Here we see a visualization of data from the most important database for plant distribution records in Germany called FloraWeb. Although FloraWeb is a highly renowned resource, the occurrence records from the previous slide, more or less randomly selected, would result in a new grid record. Here see the little yellow cloud. It is clear that historical information in natural language texts, once mobilized, has the potential to significantly increase the number of records in a map like this, and at the same time it improves the possibilities for modeling and for forecasting ecological changes. And it is equally clear that there are no human resources to extract these kind of data intellectually, and that we need an IT-based approach to do this. Now, BIOfid has a Central European focus, which means it focuses on German-speaking regions and on literature in German language. In the first two phases, in the first two project phases, it focused on certain taxonomic groups, mainly these were higher plants, birds and butterflies, but also myriapods and other insect groups are coming into consideration now. In the end, hopefully, BIOfid will be able to provide services relevant also to other regions and or to other taxonomic groups. Now, to make biodiversity data from the literature usable, some preparatory work must be done and some conditions must be met. We have to clarify copyright status of published works before we can use them for text mining. Then we need natural language text in a digital format. So we have to digitize printed literature. Next thing, we need generic text mining technology, for example, for things like lemmatization, part of speech tagging, and so on. And we need named entity recognition, both using generic approaches, but also domain-specific methods, in particular for taxonomic names. That's clear for us. We need domain-specific ontologies to make the content of the literature semantically accessible. And we need technologies for information extraction, which is certainly the hardest part of this. In the following, I can only briefly address a few of these points that we are working on in the BIOfid project. Now, ontologies are needed to give semantical context to domain-specific terms found in the literature and to recognize synonymous terms. With existing ontologies, we identified the following issues. There is not enough depth in existing ontologies. For example, the morphology of certain groups of organisms is not well covered. And there is not enough coverage of German terms, and a better coverage of German is urgently needed for our purposes. And this is why the development and the expansion of ontologies is an important task for BIOfid. Some examples of ontologies in which BIOfid is involved or to which we contribute are the Lepidoptera anatomy ontology for butterflies or the Chilopoda anatomy ontology. Two more are to be seen on this slide. Also the environmental ontology, a very large established ontology which has only very few German terms in it. Let's see how these ontologies can mesh together. This is an example of a linked BIOfid UDAFO-based ontologies. The Chilopoda anatomy ontology is linked to the UDAFO-based taxonomy ontology, which can also support ontologies of ecological interactions between, for example, centipedes and other terrestrial invertebrates. The key point here, of course, is the use of persistent identifiers when linking between ontologies. Regarding the extraction of information from natural language documents, there are many challenges. Here are some concrete examples, apart from the fact that human language as a whole is very variable and complex. Let's have a look at the active voice versus passive voice. The same statement can be expressed in both modes. And we have an example here. Harris found the orchid species in large quantities. And the second sentence, the orchid species was found in large quantities by Harris. Now, in a grammatical sense, the subject of these sentences is different, but their propositions are absolutely the same. Another example regards negation. Co-occurrences of entities can be misleading. Merely co-occurring in a sentence is not sufficient to indicate the kind of semantic relationship between words or between terms or entities in a sentence. We searched in vain for Coeloglossum viride in the Cambridge area. Here the words Coeloglossum viride, this orchid species I already showed, and Cambridge occur together, but this does not mean that the species occurs in Cambridge. It does not occur there. So this has to be handled when computers try to understand the meaning of natural language. To recognize the meaning of sentences, it is necessary to first recognize the semantic role of the words or phrases and to focus on the verb of the sentence as the cardinal element. This means to assign labels to words or phrases that indicate their semantic role associated with the verb of the sentence. The process is called semantic role labeling. Let's take a simple example. In the sentence, all dogs love sausages, the semantic role of dogs is to love an object. They are the lover, while the semantic role of the sausages is just to be loved. Now, semantic role labeling is a very old concept in linguistics, but nowadays this can be done automatically to a certain degree, and it can be supported by machine learning. And it is useful to use resources such as ProcBank and to use domain-specific annotated texts as training data for machine learning improved semantic role labeling. When dealing with such problems, we are currently somewhere in the middle and still relatively far from good solutions. We are also working on the BIOfid portal, and of course we are trying to advance the assembly of a corpus focused on Central European literature about biodiversity. In an ideal world, we could build a large corpus of whatever is important for biodiversity research in a certain area, and it would be easy to assemble an open digital library for Central European biodiversity literature and data. But in the real world, there are restrictions, of course, be it from the technical point of view or be it with regard to copyright. To come close to the goal of an open digital library, we are trying to assemble content from various resources, namely literature digitized in our own library within the BIOfid project and other projects, then content digitized elsewhere but lacking free licenses. This applies above all to Sobodat, a project in Austria, which has a large corpus of literature relevant to Central Europe. Then we also want to integrate content digitized elsewhere in which has free licenses or is in public domain. This applies to large parts of, example, BHL content. And finally, we want to use born digital content from open access, from recent open access journals. Now, integration with BHL is important for several reasons. One of them being the desire of many researchers, we hear that again and again, many researchers in biodiversity to see all digitized material pooled in BHL. This representation on this slide with these two bullets is not proportional. In reality, our library's content would have to be represented even much smaller in relation to BHL, that's clear, if we focus on the biological part of the literature. As I said, German language segments in BHL will be used for the BIOfid corpus, which means that these segments will be text mined and semantically annotated to improve its searchability and to enable information extraction. And on the other hand, German language segments in BHL are to be enlarged by ingesting BIOfid's own digitized materials. There's a number of titles digitized in our library that have no free licenses or are not directly suitable for BHL, but many others will be suitable, or hopefully we can negotiate the rights needed for this. We have fallen a little bit short of our goals in recent years and have brought in little content so far, but we hope to be able to increase this significantly in the near future. So our concept for the next phase of BIOfid includes the continuation of many proven elements of the project, such as digitizing printed literature or hosting open access journals. But there's also some new elements or new approaches to already familiar fields of activity. An important task for our text technology lab is, for example, co-reference resolution. We see an example for a co-reference here. These two sentences are easy to understand for human readers, and everyone knows that this species in the second sentence means Bellis perennis, but for a computer this is by no means easy. And in order to achieve a reliable resolution of this kind of co-references, we will use neural co-reference resolution methods, among others, and we have to optimize them for the processing of biodiversity texts. Second, it will be important for BIOfid to know our users' needs. This is why we will increase communication with our users, and a tried and tested format, which we have already received a lot of valuable feedback in, is workshops. And we intend to work with user groups that we repeatedly bring together to form some feedback loops. And the last point I would like to highlight is a standard NLP pipeline. This tool will be designed as a standalone and preferably platform-independent pipeline for automatic annotation of biodiversity literature, usable without detailed knowledge of computational linguistics. Users should be able to download these tools and run them on their own computers or servers. Annotated documents should be returned as TEI XML or as UEMA XMI, and the use of TextPub, XML schema, and other standards is also under consideration. This approach could enable users to process literature that is subject to copyright restrictions and therefore cannot be processed on our servers. Oh, I forgot 2 bullets here. Sorry. Okay, now I think it's the last slide here. Yes? Okay. Here we have a mind game in which 2 groups of actors mobilize data on Central European biodiversity in parallel. Each group works with material that they can quantitatively control and that they have copyright, the rights to use. BIOfid would be mobilizing data from segments without severe copyright restrictions, and single users interested in text mining would be able to mobilize data from segments with copyright restrictions, which is allowed for them when they do it for their own research. But then, why not pool these data collections again? Centrally mobilized as well as decentrally mobilized data, for example, in an open digital library of biodiversity literature and data. On the other hand, I am not convinced that we need to invent new infrastructures every 2 or 3 years. An important goal would be to transfer mobilized data to existing biodiversity data repositories, such as GBIF, EOL, or Globi, rather than building new infrastructures. Okay, that's the end. Thank you very much for your attention.